Welcome to the Practical Enneagram. Dr. Jerome Wagner is among the earliest students of the Enneagram in the US. His dissertation was one of the first written descriptions of the Enneagram and pioneered formal research studies on the Enneagram. Part of his study involved constructing an Enneagram inventory, and the current version of this highly researched and statistically validated Wagner Enneagram Personality Style Scales, or WEPS, can be taken online. There's a link in the show notes. Dr. Wagner is a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, supervisor, consultant in private practice, and former faculty member at the Department of Psychology and Institute of Pastoral Studies at Loyola University, Chicago. He's also the author of 9 Lenses on the World, The Enneagram Perspective, and The Enneagram Spectrum of Personality Styles, an introductory guide. He's been researching and teaching the Enneagram since 1980 and began the Enneagram Spectrum Training and Certification Program in 1995. Excitingly, that is now available online. Jerry co-teaches it with his colleague Catherine. I myself participated in the inaugural version of the online training, and it was a real hoot, along with the depth and breadth of theory covered during that course. It attracts a fun bunch of people, and it's just such a gift to be in the presence of Jerry's teaching. This opportunity to sit down and speak with him about the Myers Briggs and the Enneagram and the overlays between the two systems was a real blessing I will cherish. When you ask Jerry a question, you sense the answer being delivered from this place of stillness. His teaching is imbued with humour and a sort of sensitivity that I love. Anyway, I hope that you enjoy this conversation. It's kind of about the ways that the Myers Briggs and the Enneagram overlap and how to use the two systems together in order to grow.
Honorable one, I prefer, but Jerry.
I'm going to assume anyone listening to the podcast knows what the Enneagram is, but for people who don't know what the Myers Briggs Type Indicator is, can you maybe do a brief description of it?
Sure. So the Myers Briggs is a test that Isabel Myers and Catherine Briggs came up with. Isabel's the mother, Catherine is the daughter, to measure Jung's types. You know, I think Jung got interested in types. He has a whole book on typology because he and Freud and Jung were all in the psychoanalytic society together before Freud threw them out because they didn't buy all his ideas. They weren't sexy enough. They didn't go for the sexual instinct. And Jung said, well, how can 3 geniuses like us see things so differently? We got these different theories. And he said, maybe we perceive the world differently, or maybe we're in the world differently, you know? And so he thought, well, maybe Freud is an extrovert sensing thinker, and I, Jung, am an introverted intuitive feeler. And that's why we just see things differently. It's not right or wrong. It's just different points of view. So then he came up with his theory about types. And so the extrovert introvert holds up the best. I mean, they do all kinds of factor analyses, and that's the one that always works. So extrovert is your energy goes out, and introvert, your energy goes in. Going out means that you get energy by being with people. You get charged up by interacting with the world. Introvert, you get charged up by being by yourself. Even the extrovert, you have to externalize your thoughts to know what you're thinking. So somebody said an extrovert thinks between their mouth and your ears. If you don't know what an extrovert is thinking, you haven't been listening. If you don't know what an introvert is thinking, you haven't asked them. Because introverts, I'm an introvert, you do all that talking inside your head. My daughter's an extrovert. My daughter likes the middle seat in airplanes.
You're kidding.
That is absolutely correct, because she can talk to the person on one side, and if that's not very interesting, she can talk to the person on the other side. I, on the other hand, will pay an inordinate amount of money to not be in that middle seat. So different way of being in the world. Then the question is, well, where do you get information or data from? So you can use your senses. We all have all these functions. So we got both, but some people are born right-handed, some people left-handed. You lean one way rather than the other. So the sensing function gets information through the senses, through, what do you see? What do you feel? What do you sense rather? What do you hear? What do you touch? So sensing people, they like data. Show me the facts, show me the data. Intuitive people tend to use their imagination. So whereas sensing people read on the line, intuitive people read between the lines. So yeah, we got this data and information. What are we going to do with it? How can we change it a little bit? What are the possibilities? Sensing tends to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Intuitive goes A, G. How'd you get to G? Where did that leap come from? Well, I don't know, but I know it's right. I used to teach at Myers Briggs, and I would bring in a seashell, a conch, and I would ask people who are sensing. I'd say, okay, now what is this? And they say, well, that's this seashell, and it feels kind of rough, but here it's smooth here, and it smells a little salty, and there's a gradation between brown and cream, and very data sense oriented. I give the same seashell to an intuitive person, and they say, oh, well, this seashell is from the shore, and it was used to send a message in it, and it was found 50 years later. And actually there's a jazz trombone player who uses these things to play music with, and you're saying to yourself, where did that come from? It's like the imagination is elaborating on the data, sensing, intuiting. So now you got the data in. Now what are you going to do with it? You have to evaluate it. You have to make some judgment about it. So you can think about it, which is more a logical, right side of the brain way of analyzing it, or you can take this data and throw it up against your own experience. Do I like this? Do I not like it? Does it fit what I've learned in the past? Does it not fit what I've learned in the past? So it's a more a subjective evaluation. So thinking is more, you take this data and throw it up against some objective criteria. It's a true or false. For the feeling, it's like subjective. Do I like it? Do I not like it? So it's not so much emotional as subjective. And the thinking side wants to be fair. It wants to treat everybody the same, justice. But the feeling side wants to treat everybody with kindness and compassion. The feeling side wants relationships to be good. So they'll be nice to you. The thinking side person will say, well, the greatest contribution I can make to you is to show you where you can improve. You where you're wrong. I don't need to tell you where you're right. Anybody can do that. So the feeling person is saying, oh, good, stab me in the heart again. There's still a little blood that you haven't drained out of me, So misunderstandings occur there.
Yeah.
Now, Isabel and Catherine added another dimension. So Myers and Briggs added the judging and perceiving, which has to do with, I don't know how to describe it really. Let me give you an example. It's the judging side. It's not judgmental, but the judging side is in the world in an active way, and they want to get things done. Let's call this meeting to a halt and make a decision. I like structure. I like things decided. Perceiving side is in the world in a more allowing way. Well, let's let things unfold, and we'll see where it leads us. So let's keep the possibilities open. The judging side is kind of like, I am the master of the ship. I decide what my destiny is. I decide. The perceiving side is more, I am here to discover what my destiny is. It will reveal itself to me. So it's a very different way of being in the world. Example I use, let's say you're going somewhere and you got a judging person and a perceiving person. The judging person says, okay, we'll leave at 9:00. At 12:00, we'll stop for lunch. I've made reservations at this restaurant along the way. And then at 5:00, I've got reservations for this hotel and we'll stay there. We'll have dinner there at 6. So it's all scheduled, all mapped out. Then the judging person can relax. The perceiving person now is very tense, nervous, uptight, constricted. Oh my God. The perceiving person says, okay, I'll start driving. When I get tired, you drive. When we get hungry, we'll look for a place to eat. When we get tired, we'll look for a place to stay. So you want to keep all those options open and not foreclose too soon. The problem is the judging person might decide too quick without having enough information. The perceiving person might never decide because they can always get more information. And if you get enough information, the decision will make itself. Very different. In a way, some Enneagram types fit that. But I found, there's been a lot of studies. I can put this on my website maybe. There's been about, at least 17, 18 studies comparing the Enneagram to Myers Briggs. They're not correlated tightly enough that you can predict an Enneagram type from a Myers Briggs type and vice versa. But there are some kind of congenial correlations. There's something to be said for both of them.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense there would be correlates because they're both true. What is the MBTI used for generally now?
I think you can use it in teamwork. So understanding the different people on the team. It's used with couples. People have very different ways of being in the world.
Yeah.
I'm just laughing. I can see sensing and intuiting. The sensing person is going to want to be on time. The intuiting person has no sense of time. Same with judging and perceiving. The judging person says, it's going to take an hour to get there. A perceiving person says, well, maybe not. So there could be conflict because there's different ways of living.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful for that. Because I think I'm a judging type, Jerry, and I tend to have been partnered with perceiving types, and that is definitely a rub.
Yes, it is. Because what makes you calm makes them anxious and vice versa.
Anxious or angry, even angry. So people have researched the correlates, as you were saying, between the Myers Briggs personality types and the Enneagram types.
Yeah.
Is that a useful exercise?
I think so. I mean, if you think about, you were talking about judging and perceiving, so style 1 tends to come out judging of all the different studies that we've did. Other people have done. J tends to be the one thing that stands out. And so if you've got a 1 who comes out J on the Myers-Briggs, then you've got a scheduled 1. If you have a 1 who's a perceiver, then you might have a little balance. So that opens up the 1. There's only one right way of doing this.
Yeah.
And we got to find it. It balances. Or, if you've got an extroverted 8 or a 7, they're going to look different from an introverted 8 or a 7. So
it can be a way to add more sort of helpful nuance, because in the Enneagram descriptions, they are generally either portrayed as an extrovert or an introverted type, right?
Yeah.
For instance, 5 is always portrayed as an introverted type. Yeah. And I guess occasionally you do get extroverted 5s, do you?
Yeah. Russ Hudson is a famous 5, is extroverted, says he's extroverted. Tom Flout, who was a president of the IEA, good 5, extroverted. So you would think that this would be an abhorrence of nature.
Yeah.
And yet it happened. Most 4s are feeling.
Yeah.
But the study I did, there were a couple of thinking 4s. I don't know, the 4s might want to kick them out of the group. So it's, human nature is perverse. We just don't, we don't fit patterns perfectly. Screws up theories. No.
It's a shame, isn't it, that it's not more predictable.
And I think you probably 7s are presented as extrovert. Yeah. 4s maybe intuitive.
Yeah.
Which actually they came out intuitive for the most part. 3s seem like they're extroverted and judging.
2s, I guess, generally extroverted.
Yeah, except it's both. And also there's a balance between sensing and intuiting, and tend to be more feeling.
Okay.
Yeah. And, kind of some are feeling, some are judging, some are perceiving. And
you get people 5s who would probably, most people would think are thinking types, but you yourself are a feeling type, aren't you, Jerry?
I'm an INFP. Tendency in the studies for 5s to be thinking. But I'm positive I'm feeling. A long time ago, I had a financial advisor who, what they say about financial advisors, they invest your money until it's all gone. And he actually was very conservative. He did a fine job, but he was not making me a lot of money. And as a 5, of course, I always want to make a lot of money. But so I'm thinking, well, hell, I should fire him and get another financial advisor. But, he's a friend of mine. I really like him. He's a good guy. I don't want to hurt his feelings. That's the feeling side.
Yeah.
And that's definitely takes precedence over this is what logic would say.
Yeah.
or reason, Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a set of feeling criteria that you're using to decide by. Yeah. So I guess the reason that the 2 can't be correlated exactly is because they're measuring different things, aren't they? That's the thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
They kind of complement each other. It's like looking at the person through a kaleidoscope, so you get one pattern, then you turn it just a little bit, then you got a whole other pattern shows up, then you got another pattern. You have Milan has 8 types, and there's the big 5 factors, and then there's Hogan, his thing, I think he might have 6. Myers Briggs has 16 and Enneagram has 9. So depend on how you turn that kaleidoscope, you see different patterns.
Yeah.
And you say, well, which is true? Well, like you just said, they all have a purchase on the truth. There's different ways of looking at it.
Would you say it's a simpler system than the Enneagram and an easier one to learn?
I think so. I think probably true Myers-Briggs devotees wouldn't say that.
No.
But those of us who are dabbling in it would say, well, it seems like the Enneagram, there's more to it. I could give an Enneagram, Myers-Briggs workshop in a half a day. I could do an Enneagram, but I would say, if you want to do the Enneagram, it's going to take a whole day, maybe 3 days. Do my training, it's going to take, 5-6 days. There's just a lot to the Enneagram. There's a lot of different facets to it. And there is a lot of depth to the Myers-Briggs. I mean, your favorite function is really pretty core to who you are. You're, sensing thinker, intuitive feeler. But I think the Enneagram kind of goes deeper, into who you really are. But I do think there's more to the Enneagram.
The Enneagram has built into it a sort of growth or developmental journey per type, right? The Myers-Briggs, does it do the same in that regard?
Well, I think what Jung would say is, what you are in the first half of your life, in the second half of your life, those functions that you haven't developed kind of automatically come out. Jung talks about the individuation function that we all have, that archetype, which moves towards balance. So all the different parts of our self differentiate, and then the self archetype integrates them all. What type are you now?
What, on the Enneagram or the
Myers-Briggs?
Myers-Briggs, it always tested ENFJ, but I think it might be INFJ.
Okay, all right. So Jung would say, so you've developed the intuitive, feeling, judging in the first part of your life, and then the sensing part of you, the thinking part of you, he didn't have the perceiving part, but that part just kind of naturally evolves in the second half of your life. So I'm an INFP. So in theory, the extroverted sensing thinking would come out. Maybe you would have to help it, foster it, be more intentional about it. So there are ways to develop your sensing function or your thinking function, whichever one is kind of weak in you. Here are exercises to develop your left hand because you've been using your right hand all your life. But, to play that piano, you got to use the left hand too. So I think there is a developmental aspect to the Myers-Briggs. And I think they would say the shadow function, so that function that's the opposite of your favorite one, actually plays kind of an integrative role too. It's the one that's that you're most awkward with. If you can develop that, kind of brings about balance in your psyche.
Oh, I like that a lot. That's so clear. So in my case, so if it's IN, the opposite cognitive function, it would be extroverted sensing is the opposite.
Correct.
Yeah. And in your case, as an INFP, is it the same one?
Well, let me think.
This confuses me a bit. I think we both use introverted intuition first. So the opposite, the shadow function, is extroverted sensing for us both.
And now I got to think about this. So you're
INFJ.
INFJ. So the Myers-Briggs folks would say the judging function is thinking and feeling. That's the J, thinking and feeling. If you're an extrovert, the feeling would be your favorite, but you're an introvert. So that changes things. That means intuition is your favorite function. So the opposite of that would be sensing. So extroverted sensing thinking would be what you would need to develop.
Yeah.
So you might want to, study the stock market and
Oh, no.
do things like that. Or maybe with the Enneagram, you would want to do some neurobiology studies, you want to be more logical and data-based about all this. Forget about your fanciful intuitions and ideas, Is there any evidence for this? That's right.
My least favorite question ever. He says we have to do shadow work anyway. That's what I want to know. It can all stay there.
Yes, that's right. Which is never any fun because you're awkward. You get embarrassed trying to do it. It's really hard. But then you create some balance.
Well, there's a company called Personality Hacker. Have you heard of them? Personality Hacker.
I don't know that.
They say that, let's say I am INFJ. So my cognitive functions that I'm using in preference order are introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, might be introverted sensing, and then the fourth one is extroverted thinking.
I have a chart
I don't know
about all that somewhere. Spells all that out. And if I had that available, I could haul it out.
It's a terrible thing to attempt to talk about in an interview. I don't know what I'm doing.
But now you can see that there's more to the Myers-Briggs than we initially said. Possibilities showing up.
Yeah. So in this car model of theirs, they say that the fourth cognitive function in my preference stack is the most immature one, the 3-year-old, they call it. And then it's a sort of growth system based on that. But then an equally valid approach is to look at the cognitive functions I completely don't use by being an INFJ, right?
Yes.
What do you think? Do you think that's like the sort of...
That makes sense.
Yeah. Just to say there are obviously ways to grow with the Myers-Briggs. It just takes understanding of the cognitive functions. Let's not make this interview completely unintelligible to anyone listening.
All right.
So how should we do that, Jerry? Help me out.
Well, here's the thought. Let's just do this. I'm doing an all-day workshop, and after this conversation, people will say, I hope you get your act together by then. It's on the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs. So, we just have 50 minutes, 55 minutes? That's a whole day where I can really mystify people. Fascinating thing. Now, I'm going to hope that people know the Enneagram. And so you've got the wings, which is your neighbor on either side. And then you've got those lines, those connections where you go when you're in balance and when you're under stress. If we do this real quickly, just take the one. Take the one, please. The one tends to be J on the Myers-Briggs. Right. So they like things decided. They like schedules. They like organization. They like, if you're going to get things running right, you got to have it pretty well organized. So they tend to be J. If they want balance, interestingly enough, the 9 and the 2 both tend to score higher on the perceiving function. The one is connected to the 7. The one is connected to the 4, both of them tend to correlate higher with the perceiving. So if the one wants a little balance, if they want a little openness, they want to open up their style a little bit, they can either go to their wings or they can go to their stress or balance point. And you say, great. Wow, isn't that amazing? Does that happen again? And I say, why, yes, it does. Let's go to style 2. So 2s on different studies tended to come out extrovert, intuitive feeling. Right. Does that mean there are no introverted sensing thinkers, 2s? Wrong. There are, but they tend to be ENF. If you want to balance that, the 2 has a 1 and a 3 on either side of them. The 1s and the 3s tend to be more on the thinking side. Interesting. The 2 is connected to the 8. The 2 is connected to the 4. So the 2 is extrovert, the 4 is introvert, the 2 is feeling, the 8 is thinking. So that connection allows them to kind of naturally get some balance in their system. For the 3, if anybody's still listening, you've got 3s tend to be extroverted, thinking, judging.
Extroverted, thinking, judging, yeah. Okay.
Extroverted, thinking, judging. They want a little balance. They go to their 2 wing, and 2s tend to be feeling. Go to their 4 wing, they tend to be feeling, introverted, and perceiving. So 4s tend to be NFs for sure, intuitive feeling. 3s connected to the 6, introverted feeling, which balances the 3's extroverted thinking. And 3 is connected to the 9, the easygoing 9. 3 is extroverted, 9 tends to be introverted. 3 can lean towards thinking, 9 more feeling. 3 is judging, 9 is perceiving. So it's like, in a way, the balance is kind of built in. So if you tend to call up in yourself, if you're a 3, the 9 in you or the 2 in you or the 4 in you or the 6 in you, that Myers-Briggs preference tends to come along with it. You get 2 for the price of 1.
That's great. Yeah.
So how about 4s? You say, oh my God, please go on. 4s tend to be introverted, INFP, introverted, but mostly introverted feeling.
Yeah.
So they say you get a little balance for them. They got a 3 on one side, a 5 on the other. 3s tends to be extroverted, judging, balances the 2s, introverted, perceiving. 5s tend to be thinking, even though I screw up that correlation as a feeler. 4 is connected to the 1, which is thinking and judging, balancing their feeling and perceiving. And they're connected to the 2, which is similar. So but 2s tend to be NF, as do 4s. 2s might be a little bit more extroverted than 4s. Now, just to muddy the waters more, I did not a great controlled study, but I did the Myers Briggs and the Enneagram at an Enneagram conference one time. And people who knew their subtypes, so you got self-preservation, social, and sexual. The self-preservation subtypes tended to be introvert.
Really?
Social and sexual tended to be extrovert.
Oh, that's interesting.
This workshop I'm doing next Thursday, I'm going to ask people there who they're going to get together and type alikes, Enneagram, and ask them, where do you fall in the Myers-Briggs based on what your wing is and what your subtype is? Yeah. There's just a lot of variables that you got to kind of balance. Okay, 5s, just to finish this. 5s tend to be introverted thinkers. If you want to do a little feeling, 4s on one side tend to be feeling. 6s actually tend to be more feeling. Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting. Not so, a little variety. I'm just looking at my chart here. 6s tended to be ISFJ, ISTJ, INFP, ENFP. They're all over the ballpark. But for 6s, the introverted feeling judging tend to be kind of common. Anyway, 5s. So you can get feeling on the 4 and the 6. 5 is connected to the 8, which brings you out of yourself, out of your introverted cave into the world. 8s tend to be extroverted. 5 is connected to the 7s. 7s also tend to be out there. They're more extroverted than introverted. So 5s, we tend to go back and down. If you want to go out and up, go to the 7 and the 8. All right. The 6s. Introverted feeling, leaning towards judging. So if 6 want to get on their thinking function, lean over to the 5. 6s want to be a little bit more extroverted, lean over to your 7 wing. If you want to get away from the judging, go to the 9, which tends to be perceiving. If you want to be a little more extroverted than introverted, 6 is connected to the 3 to go over to the 3. So I'm going to do all this next Thursday. 7s, extroverted, sensing, intuiting.
Extroverted, sensing, intuiting.
Extroverted, sensing, intuiting. Now, they're also all over the ballpark. So I've just, the 7s come out ENFP, ENTP, ESFP, ESTP, really. The thing in common that most of the different studies found, extroverted sensing, intuiting are pretty close. So if 7s want to get a little more introverted, they can go to their 6 wing. If they wanted to be a little bit more intuitive, even though they are pretty intuitive, they can go to the 8. 8s tend to be in. The 7 is connected to the 1, which gets them in touch with the J. You got a lot of options. Pick one. 7s also go to the 5, introverted. Go inside, go a little bit deeper into this. So again, kind of a nice connection between the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs. 8s, extroverted, intuitive thinking. The other thing in my study, I thought 8s would be judging. They're kind of no nonsense, get it done, decide, stop talking, do it. But they tended to be P, perceiving. Yeah, my understanding is like in life, don't tell me what I have to do, how I should be. Don't tell me to do it this way or that way. I'm open. I'm going to do whatever I want. So that's the P, Yeah, you're not going to put me into a box. Other studies tend to be the 8s, extroverted, intuitive, and thinking. So if you want to get a little bit more perceiving, they can go over to their 7 wing. If they wanted to be a little bit more introverted feeling, then they go to their 9 wing to balance the extroverted thinking. The thinking makes sense. Justice is a big issue for 8s, and that's an issue for thinkers. 8s who are kind of hard-nosed can soften up a little bit, go over to the 2. 2s tend to be more feeling, 8s are more thinking. Balance, justice with a little compassion.
I'm sure you get feeling 8s as well. How common is that, Jerry, in your study?
Well, on the 8, here's what we found. ENFP, ENTP, ENTJ, ESTJ.
Mm.
So a lot of this, they came out thinkers.
Yeah. Interesting. Should we do the nines?
And nines, at least in my studies, nines couldn't make up their mind. They were everything, but tended to be INFP and ISFP. So introverted, feeling, perceiving. So nines who are, if they're leaning introverted, they can go over to the 8, become more extroverted, or they could lean over to the 1, and which would be more judging. So, you've got a lot of options. Pick one and do it. 9 is connected to the 6, which would get them in touch with a J. 6s tend to be leaning towards J rather than P. And a 9, and when they're in a flow state, the 3 arises in them, and the 3 tends to be extroverted and judging to balance their introverted perceiving. So it kind of puts some structure, some form. It kind of channels their energy into action. So, the extroverted judging of the 3 kind of focuses the introverted perceiving of the 9. So I find that fascinating. It's, at least there is that kind of correlation that makes sense between the Myers Briggs and the Enneagram.
Yeah.
As you see, there's so much variety. You can't say, oh, well, you're extroverted, so you can't be a 5.
No.
Most of the time that's true, but not always.
So that was like using the Enneagram to bridge style balance. Create balance. Do you think sensing types would even
be interested in the Enneagram?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they do. They are. You would think intuitive would probably be more interested in it. Now I'd like to do a study between coaches and therapists. Would coaches be more sensing and psychoanalysts be more intuitive? Maybe? So coaches might be more J than P. Let's come up with a program, behavioral change model, and bring about some change, as opposed to the intuitive perceiver. Well, let's sit around and think about ourselves for about 10 years, and then we'll see what we want to do.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So I think, because I'm, indiscriminate, I think any type would be interested in the Enneagram, but maybe for different reasons.
Yeah.
The thinking person might be interested in the Enneagram because now I know how to change my spouse. Whereas the feeling person might be interested in the Enneagram. Now I can understand my spouse. Yeah,
that makes sense. This is very cool. This was very unexpected. So you've created this, and you're going to be sharing this next week in the workshop.
I am. And maybe I had an article on the Myers Briggs and the Enneagram, and I, of course, lost it somewhere in my old computer. But I'm tempted to maybe write up something where I could include these charts, because 5s, we just love charts. And so I could show this, or maybe even just do a short article and put it on my website, which you're going to tell people it's EnneagramSpectrum.com.
Yes. I definitely will be doing that, and I'll put it in the episode show notes as well. Annoyingly, by the time I release this episode, which will be, I think, in a month, Jerry, it will be beyond the date of the
okay.
workshop.
So people would just feel bad that they missed it.
Will you run it again regularly?
Probably not.
Oh.
I'm intuitive, so I did it once. That's enough.
Will you record it and make it available on the website for purchase or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's through this organization, and I think they record it, so you could probably access it through them. I'll find out about that.
Great.
Yeah.
And if not, they can content themselves with the information in this episode, which I think
absolutely.
It's been
That's
great.
Correct. They should be grateful for what they're getting.
Exactly.
That's right.
What else have I not asked you about the wonderful overlays between these?
Well, we've kind of covered it. I mean, one system kind of nuances the other. I tend to be teaching the Enneagram more these days. So I would use the Myers-Briggs to nuance the Enneagram rather than the other way around. I suppose if I were doing more Myers-Briggs workshops, I might bring in the Enneagram to show how some of those Myers-Briggs functions show up in 9 different types.
So the potential is there to do both of those things. Which is useful. Do you think you get people who use both of them, or do you think people tend to use one or the other? People in the helping professions? Well,
I'm just making this up. I wonder if the difference would be the difference between judging and perceiving. So if I'm going to insult all the judging types, here's my system. I got the Enneagram, I got the Myers-Briggs. And so I'm going to kind of use that understanding that structure when I work with people. As an intuitive perceiving type, rather than I'm imposing the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs on you, the client, I'm kind of listening and I'm seeing, well, what's arising out of you? And that reminds me of the thinking function on the Myers-Briggs. That reminds me of some of these 5 dynamics or whatever. So it's like you've got these templates in the back of your mind as a coach or a therapist or, whatever you're doing, parent. And then the data comes out of the person in front of you and it kind of triggers, this is one way of understanding that.
I love how you've answered that. And it reminds me of something I really love about your teaching is it's not imposing. You don't impose at all. It's very much like that. What is it? It's like it's quite gentle or something. But being a judging type, I'm more of the first situation you described is my tendency.
Yeah, which is another valid way of doing things. When you're on the perceiving side, me anyway, you're kind of, floundering around all over the place. Whereas the judging side is, all right, let's put some order into what we're talking about. And where do you want to go with this? I think you need both. They kind of balance each other out. So I, with my clients would say, well, okay, good. Now I understand myself. Thanks to your P. Now what? Now what do I do with myself? Could we get a little J in here?
Thanks so much, Jerry. It was really interesting. I hope that you enjoyed that. My next conversation is with Catherine Farver, who pioneered the work and the theory on tri-type. Don't forget to subscribe and do leave a rating for the podcast. I don't have many and it would help.